Okay, so congratulations in finishing lesson 1. So I assume that you already have read the entire lesson 1 and answered the activity analysis and the application or the exercises of lesson 1. So we'll now proceed to lesson 2. Um, Again, I would like to emphasize that um, this pre-recorded video is just a supplementary of our main modality, which is the modular approach, which is basically we are using modules, which is a self-learning material. So, um, this video is just a summary of what is written in the module. Okay, so you are expected to basically read everything in the module and answer all of the exercises, activities that are included in every lesson. Okay, now we'll proceed with lesson 2, which is quantitative research designs. So basically in this lesson, we will discover the different um, uh, approach in quantitative research. So basically, in our previous lesson, I introduced to you the two main research approach, which is quantitative and qualitative methods. So, however, we will only focus in quantitative research designs. Okay. Medyo mainit kasi dito. So, I apologize if I keep punas-punas my face. Charot. Alright. So, um, you read first the introduction and you are expected to answer the activity and analysis part of the lesson 2, and you need to submit your answers in our learning management system. So I will provide the link and the LMS on our LMS page. Okay. Now we do understand that quantitative research is focused on numeric data. It's focused on structured research instruments, and the data collection is the researcher doesn't really need to be involved entirely in the data collection. However, the analysis of the results is through different statistical tools. Etc. Okay? Now, quantitative research can be further classified into two, which is experimental and non-experimental. Okay? So, ito lang yung parang picture niya. Ayan, image. And then, na-state lang dyan yung, yung mga different um, designs in experimental and the non-experimental. Okay, we will basically discuss each of that one by one later. Okay, so let's define first experimental research. So basically, when in the term experimental, it basically conducts experiment towards its sample. It involves a study of the effect of the different manipulation or systematic manipulation of one variable on another variable. So in research, it is important that you need to identify your research variables. I hope that you have reviewed your research subjects on your senior high school. To those na nag-senior high school, I believe most of you have encountered research. Please review on that because it is very needed in this course. So basically, experimental design, as I said earlier, that it is you manipulate the two variables on another variable. Okay, so the manipulated variable we call that is the experimental treatment. Okay, or the independent variable, kung ano yung kinuha natin na data. And then the observed and measured variable is called the dependent variable. For example, assume a university researcher wanted to investigate the effect of providing online feedback. Okay, so of the course examination. So siguro tingnan niya kung let's say for example ito yung ano niya, feedback ng student, and then ano yung result ng examination. So, I'll give them more further examples later. Meron pala dito yung example ng experimental. Okay. And then, non-experimental research. The researcher identifies variables and may look for relationships among them. Pwede na mangitag relationship. Let's say, anong relationship ng gender in terms of the academic performance of a student in the programming subject. So, pwede ganun. Okay? But does not manipulate the variables. So, we don't change those variables. Major forms of non-experimental research relationship studies includes ex post facto correlation research and survey research. So, ito yung example kanina, sinabi ko, I'll just read. Assume a university researcher wanted to investigate daw ano yung effect of the providing na may online feedback to students from the professors and immediately following the course examinations. Okay? So, using two sections of, let's say, economics na subject not by the same professor. So, yung researcher kumuha siya ng random procedure. Select siya ng isang section to receive immediate online feedback. Ano yung online feedback? Ano yung result ng mga quizzes, ng mga examinations, projects through online about their performance on test questions. Okay? And so yung isang section. And then yung another section would receive feedback during their next lesson, next class session. Okay? So that is the independent variable basically. So the researcher would compare the two sections exam scores and their final grades in the course. So the dependent variable there is the final grades. Okay? So yung feedback, yun yung what we manipulate, which is basically the experimental treatment and the independent variable basically. And then the researcher would compare the two section exam scores and their final grades in the course, which is dependent variable. So if test scores and final grades were higher than could be accounted for by chance in the section receiving online feedback, the researcher could tentatively conclude that there is evidence the online feedback treatment or the independent variable contributed to greater learning than in-class feedback. Okay? So, that means now, because of online feedback, tumaas yung final grades or the test scores of the student. So, basically, the researcher can conclude that. So, we are testing these two sections. We are experimenting these two sections kung meron bang effect online feedback towards the student. So, in conclusion, meron daw effect. But that is just an example. So these are the different experimental designs. When we say true experimental, it is a design considered when you consider an experimental design to be a true experimental design, it must follow these following criteria. First is the researcher manipulates the experimental variable. Okay, the researcher has control over the independent variables as well as the treatment and the subjects. So siya magbuot. Okay, siya mag-control kung kinsa ang eksperimentohan and kinsa ang treatment. Okay? There must be one experimental. So dapat isa ka experimental group and one comparison or control group. Okay? And subjects are randomly assigned either to the control group or experimental group. So, randomly assigned siya kung dito ba siya magbutang sa control group o yung experimental group. Sir, unso man na, sir, ng experimental o control group? Ang experimental group, mo to siya itong group na nahatagan o treatment. Example, katong previous na example na to, which is katong group na administered with an online feedback. So they are the experimental group. The control group is those who have not received any treatment. So a control group is a group that does not receive any treatment. Okay, so sa true experimental design, we do have a pre-test, post-test only, Solomon for group. Okay, we also have quasi-experimental. In quasi-experimental is that it is designed in which there is no control group. Kumbaga, subjects are randomly assigned to groups lang. Okay. And then pre-experimental, this is just a one-shot case study, and this experimental design is considered very weak, and researchers has a little control over the research. So one example of that is a one-group pre-test, post-test. So walay experimental, also walay control group. Wala lang, natagalang mo sila o test, and then walay experiment na hitabo. And then, kasi pre-experimental na, no? You need to conduct a pre-experimental if you want to further interpret your data on the actual experimental research that you'll be conducting. So, naghatag na kang test, and then naghatag na kang another post-test. And then, you just, parang normal flow lang ng entire klase. So, in experimental, kasi, we do experiments na wala sila kabalo. Okay? It would be best if they don't know anything na gina-experimentuhan din sila. Okay? In order to avoid what we call as Hawthorne effect. H-A-T-H-O-R-N-E. Hawthorne effect. This Hawthorne effect is a phenomena wherein the subject will parang mausap gani ilahang attitude, kumbaga nakabalo sila, gina-experimentuhan din sila or ginabantayan sila sa ilahang mga normal routines. Okay? So ginagamit ning Hawthorne, gina-coining ng Hawthorne effect sa mga business courses, but it can also be coined in IT and research. Diba? What if ka nang nakabalo ka nga, ginagatan, naka-eksperimento ni sa ako ang teacher, dapat kanang ako dong paninuton ang akong results sa akong exam. So, mawala ang nature sa pag-experiment, diba? Kung dili natural ang setting, dili natural ang mindset sa mga subject mo. Okay, so it would be best if you will not inform your subject that there is an experiment going on. Okay, hindi ko pala na I will discuss the muna. Okay, ayan, yes, na ako'y na ako'y stream of League of Legends. Ako na chat-chat. Ayan. Diba, hindi ko na-include yung mga different true experimental design. This is our module pala, so please browse on it. So it's still loading. Okay, I'll discuss true experimental design because true experimental design can still be further classified into based on its implementation. Okay, ayan. Here. Okay. So, there are three variations, which is pre-test, post-test control group design, post-test control group design, and Solomon 4 group design. 4 variations pa, and pre-test, post-test design. And then, pre-test, post-test control design, of course, the subjects are randomly assigned to group kung ano ba siya, experimental or control group. So, a pre-test is given to both groups, so the same test of the two experimental and control group, and then the experimental group receives the treatment. Kita nga ito, nagatag ka video sa ilahan, nagatag ka additional na mga materials, motivate baka sa ilahan, nagatag ka feedback. So, sila itong experimental group. And control group, wala sila any other treatment. Natural lang. So, the post-test is given to both. So, the procedure is summarized as follows. So, this is the procedure. So, sa experimental group is R stands for random selection of the subjects na i-select sila into kung sila ba ang experimental or sila ang control group. And then O1 is basically pretest, and then X is basically intervention, which is the treatment. And then O2 is the post-test. Okay, so wala ang design sa experimental group na assign sila randomly, nakalan sila pretest, and then nakalan sila treatment, and then magkanda ka ang post-test. And then, the control group is, they are assigned randomly to the control group, and then they were given pretest, and then afterwards they are given another test, which is the post-test, which is the same with the experimental group. So I would like to emphasize kung unsay mong gihatag ng test with the experimental group, the same dapat po sa control group in both pretest and post-test to see if there is a significant difference of the two groups based on their scores different score difference. So mo siyang pre-test, post-test control group design. So duha lang ka group. And then we do have a post-test only control group design. The subjects are randomly assigned to groups, experimental and control group. So kani siya wala siya pre-test. So however, experimental group, they are given with a this the treatment, and then they were given a post-test. So control group, diretso post-test. Again, the same dapat ang test na na-administer sa experimental group and then sa control group also. And then here we go with the Solomon for group design. Medyo complicated siya gamay, but however, you can still understand it when you have parang mga examples. It is considered as the most prestigious experimental design because it minimizes internal and external validity. So there are 4 groups basically, and they are randomly assigned. So 2 of the groups is experimental group 1 and control group 1. They are pre-tested. So the researcher would administer the same test on group 1 and group 2, or E group 1 and C group 1. Okay. The other 2 groups is receive routine or no treatment at all. Okay, so experimental group 2 and control group 2. So a post-test is given also to all 4 groups. Okay. So sa kaning siya, kaning set kaduhang pair, wala sila pre-test. Okay. Although na sila post-test later. Kumani siya ang summarize. So basically, kung makita na to kung na may difference ang upat. Okay? So first group, experimental group, the first group, is that na siya pre-test, na treatment, and then ay post-test, so kompleto. Sa control group 1, is that na siya pre-test, and then wala treatment, and then post-test. And then sa experimental group is that wala sila pre-test, post-test, treatment, and then post-test, diretso. And then sa control group wala siya pre-test, wala siya treatment, diretso siya post-test. However, all of the post-test must be the same with all of the 4 groups. So we can minimize the internal and external validity here in the Solomon 4 group, and you basically can identify if there is a significant difference of the 4 groups, and if the treatment is really successful, if the difference is basically positive. So you can explore that more on searching on your module assessment. I will explain to you on the module assessment later. So one group pretest post-test design, it provides a comparative description of a group of the subjects before and after experimental treatment. So isa lang ka group, and then kita lang nato siya sa kaniya kang say effect sa treatment sa isa ka group lang, wala control group, purely experimental group lang siya. So makita sa group sa this Sa researcher, kung na may difference sa post-test and um, post-test and sa pre-test and post-test nila. Okay, wala akong nabutang sa PowerPoint. I apologize, but you can still read it sa module. So, in Quasi-Experimental, the researcher or the experimenter basically assemble groups na masya class. Okay, this design has two types, the non-equivalent control group and the time series design. Okay, so let's define each. The non-equivalent control group design, so basically, work yapon siya og pre-test and post-test control group design, except that wala siya random assignment of subjects to the experimental control group. So, kumbaga, sige, kani ang may random subjects. So, kani tibok section, mo ni siya ang section A, mo ni siya ang experimental group. Kaning section B, mo na siyang control group. Okay? Ano yung difference sa pre-test and post-test? Sa pagkatong dito sa true experimental na pre-test post-test, random man ang assignment o kung kanang subjects. So there is a non-equivalent control group design. So siya? So basically, wala random assignment of these subjects. Same lang gihapon, so I don't need to discuss this. Time series design, the researcher periodically observes or measures the subject. So, kumbaga, daghan ang iyang mga pre-test, multiple observation. Tanaon niya ang sa mga different iyang scores diri sa tulo ka book pre-test. Sir, kailangan tulo ka pre-test. It doesn't need to, basta multiple dapat, more than 2. And then, nag-experiment na yun siya. And then after mag-process ng tulo ka buok, duha, lima, depende sa mo observations. And then the observer, and again there's no random assignment, and then there is only one group. Okay, for the time series design, so you will notice or the researcher can identify if there is basically a difference of their scores. So, pre-experimental design is considered very big. So, ako naman na-discuss. Kumbaga, a single group is exposed to an experimental treatment and observe after the treatment. So, isa lang ka-group, isa lang ka-experiment, then isa lang po ka-test. Okay, let's go back with our... Okay, in non-experimental quantitative research, the researcher identifies variables and may look for relationships. Pwede maging relationships among them, but does not manipulate the variables. So, hindi niya i-tweak ang mga variables. Wala i-experiment pa itabo. Of course, non-experimental yan, no? So, nakita itong relationships sa dua ka variable. Okay? Kung compatible ba sila. Charot. Diba? Kung kamo ba kahit inyong relationship, diba? Tanaw na ito kung positive ba inyong relationship or negative ba inyong relationship, diba? So, we can do that using quantitative research. Yeah, so basically, so, the researcher identifies variables and may look for any possible correlation or relationship with it. The significant forms of non-experimental research are relationship studies, and including ex post facto research, correlation research, survey, descriptive research. So, let's just discuss more on ex post facto research. Hindi ko na discuss, but please just read. Hindi ko na include dito. Just please read on the what you call this on the module. Okay, so. Ex post facto research design is like an experiment gihapon. However, the researcher does not need to manipulate the independent variables which has already occurred in the natural course of events. So the researcher simply compares groups differing on the pre-existing independent variable to determine any relationship to the dependent variable. Okay. Ang example naman yan is example, you want to know or the answer of the question, what is the effect of part-time work on school achievement of high school students? So that is example of ex post facto research. So survey is one example of quantitative approach. Survey conduct through self-reporting. Okay, you gather data from individuals, two or more variables, and then you seek to determine if these variables are related with each other. So when ayan, yes, you can use questionnaire, interviews, and aims to describe the characteristics of and opinions of the feedback or responses of the respondents. Okay, so magamit yung kag mga questionnaire ana, most likely this questionnaire. Okay, sir, the survey research design permits the researcher to summarize the characteristics of different groups or to measure their attitudes and opinions as they exist in a population. Example, an educational researcher might ask a group of parents of what kind of sex education programs, if any, that they believe schools should include it in, let's say, senior high school or high school. So, a survey of teachers also could reveal their perceptions of the giftedness in school children. So, ma-determine ninyo yung the characteristics and the description of the responses based on the responses of the survey that you have provided. So, another important research design of non-experimental is correlational research design. So, correlational research design basically gathers data from individuals on two or more variables. Okay? It also seeks to determine if the variables is related ba siya. Correlated ang tawag ana. Okay? So, correlation means, when we say correlation, take note, correlation means the extent to which the two variables vary directly or inversely um, in their relationship. When we say directly, it means positive correlation, or inversely, it means a negative correlation. So the degree of relationship is called as a numeric index called coefficient of correlation. So muna siya ang degree of relationship sa duha ka variable. Ano na inyong relationship ko, sa'yo man yung degree pa ba mo sa stage na ina-ina pa ba mo? Na mo sa stage nga ka na, getting serious, getting there, and then, na ba mo sa level na nag-talk na mo sa yung future. So, you basically determine the degree of the relationship. Diba? So, it's somehow similar with with the definition of the coefficient of correlation. You can just simply say a correlation coefficient. So, correlation research might ask about the relationship between the quality of writing, kung nindot ba produced by the college students sa ilang academic performance. Okay? So, ma-determine mo nga na may relationship ang kanindot sa penmanship sa estudyante sa ilang academic performance, sa ilang grades. Okay? One researcher might also investigate the relationship between the performance on a language aptitude test and success in a high school foreign language course. Okay. So, I'll explain further the inverse and direct relationship of correlation. Kasi, take note class, the correlation design, ito yung parang the main design that we'll be using sa ato ang final project, which is to produce a research, quantitative research. Diba naka-stated to sa course outcome na you need to provide or produce or write a quantitative research implementing correlation design. Clear sa clear. How to clear canvas. I want to use. Okay. Direct relationship. So, pag direct relationship, so, straight dapat na siya. Okay, may siya X. Buta na ito ng tayo ka-variable. Y. Okay, but direct relationship, assuming that's brightness. So that means, what are you doing? When we say direct relationship, okay, okay. Direct relationship is basically pag mataas ang X variable, that means, expression open, taas po ang where variable. So the increase of the for X variable is also an increase of the Y variable. So we call that in the correlation as direct relationship or positive correlation. Now, for for the other one, which is inverse relationship, we call it as the negative correlation. So inanayahang representation. So pag ang X variable is increasing, is the Y variable is also decreasing. Okay? So pag ang X variable is increasing, the Y variable is decreasing. So that is inverse correlation or negative correlation. So pag ang Y variable is, or pag X variable is increasing, the Y variable is increasing. So inverse relationship or negative correlation. Okay? So, baliktad mo, no? Pero na mag-work man po daw nagyapon sa romantic relationship, no? Diba? According to sila na opposite attracts. Ang isa kay maldita, ang isa kay bungutan. Marag ako ko yan. lang. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so take note that I will have another discussion about correlation kasi this is our main design for our final project. So let's have a special in-depth discussion about correlation. Okay, so that ends our lesson 2. I hope you will read the entire module and please answer the application part of the element of the lesson, and you need to submit your answers in the LMS. Okay? Alright, so I will stop the recording of